Welcome to this episode of the Xavier Files. As a part of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast, I'm JC, and I am excited to introduce our guest, the voice of X-Men 97's Magneto, Matthew Waterson. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to be here, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm a little grumpy that you had JP in before me, but you know.
You guys were actually literally scheduling each at the same time on
around
email, and JP just dropped the first and you said the second. So that's really what it came down to.
He's quicker. Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. And I'm Rod. Just be completely transparent. I'm a little bit high from dental anesthesia. But
which, incidentally, he didn't offer to share with either of their other two.
Right. But I'm kind of functional, although most people are just used to this anyway. So some real quick housekeeping. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single X-Men animated episode we can find. The podcast started with the original 1992 X-Men, the animated series, building up to the release of X-Men 97. So today we're going to be chatting about Matthew's character and their biggest moments from season 1 of X-Men 97 or season 6 of X-Men, depending on how you're counting. So there will probably be spoilers. Shame on you if you haven't watched it this time. It's literally the number one rated Marvel thing ever now. So just watch it and come back. Pause the podcast, watch it, come back. It's a great show.
It's my turn, Rod. You can stop. It's fine. And don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, make sure you are following us on your favorite podcast services. You guys don't want to hear us talk. You want to hear about Matthew. So let's get into it. Obviously, this is an X-Men focused podcast. We're going to talk a bunch about X-Men 97 and your role as Magneto, but would love to hear from you. What are the other roles you've done outside of the X-Men world that you're most proud of?
It's funny. I get a version of this question a lot at appearances and things where I get to meet and talk to people, and usually it's hard to answer because I have different things from certain characters. I usually boil it down to discounting Magneto for my affection for that being the obvious. The other two that I usually come up with are the very first animation job I got, which was on a show called Troll Hunters, which was sort of the Tales of Arcadia series that Guillermo del Toro did with Mark Guggenheim and the Hagemans and all these people who had been with Pixar and stuff like that. And the thing was that was all movie stars and celebrities. And I was a role that was only supposed to be in 1 or 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. And then the head of the studio just liked the character. So she said, well, don't kill him yet. Just hang on to him. So the stuff that I found out later was that because of the way the animation worked, they had to make a bigger or more complicated model for the character in order to have him do some more stuff. And then they had so much money invested in the character, they had to, motivate. They had to use him enough to justify the expense. So then he had to be in more episodes. But by then they couldn't just kill him because now he'd been in so many episodes that there was an emotional attachment to him. So now they had to find the suitable way to do him in. And so eventually I got to be in the entire season, the entire series, in a role that was a blast because they kind of kept having to find what they were going to do with it as they went. And, all self-deprecating aside, if they had known how big the role is, given who else they had in the show, they would have gone and got a name because they would have been here, it's 35 episodes out of a 50 episode show.
Yeah.
So that, and it was a great show and it was gorgeous and it was a blast because, it was Guillermo del Toro right when he was winning an Oscar. So DreamWorks were like, whatever you want to do, man. You can have all the processing power in the world. And who do you want in it? Great. Have them. Kind of thing.
My niece is a huge fan of that show. She loves. She has the toys and stuff.
It's a blast. It was great, and so because that was the first animation job I had, and it sort of, because of what it became, it's one of the things that made it so that other people went, oh yeah, no, we can hire him. He's not going to tank our projects, kind of thing. And then everybody involved with it has gone on to do other stuff. One of the writers in Troll Hunters that ended up being the showrunner for the second show in the group, the Alien one, Three Below, was Ashley Bradley, who was then brought into. She was the creator and showrunner for What If on Marvel, so the other writers on it are now on Star Wars, and they're on here, and they're everybody sort of went on to do things. So there's this feeling of it of everyone kind of went, oh, we got a lot of, well, not everyone, a lot of people felt oh, this was the thing that got me a break, and that was the way I felt. about it. So that one's always going to have a really special place to me. And then the other one is the series I did right before this that I actually did with AJ Locasio, which was Crude's Family Tree, which was a TV show version of the Crude's movies. That one is great because it was just a straight sitcom. It's animated, but it's a straight slapstick sitcom. So A, it's one my kids can watch, and B, I don't get to do like slapstick comedy that much. And that was one where I got to do, 52 episodes of just falling down wells, being crushed, being thrown off of things, being tripped, being smashed. The library that they have of my screams of terror is endless. And so that one was so much fun to do because I don't get to do that as much.
Love that. And then the ones that stood out to me when we had heard that, you had gotten the role as Magneto, Jason Blood and Etrigan for the Batman. I forget what the subtitle.
Gotham.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that one was a plus.
Etrigan's just got to be a wild one to read because you're like, oh, I have to speak in rhyme. Like,
yeah. And that was it. Like, in full disclosure, I was not familiar with that character. And so the director of that, Wes Gleason, I knew him because he did Justice League Action, and my wife Rachel was Wonder Woman in Justice League Action. So I got to meet him when like she had done SDCC and I'd sort of gone with her as the tag along. And so sort of got to meet him there. And then they got a hold of me and he said, hey, so I have this character, which is Jason Blood and Etrigan in this Batman movie. And Jason Blood sounds just like you. He has a sort of English accent, sort of gentleman's English accent. He goes, Etrigan is a demon. And I also do a good amount of creature stuff. So he said, I'd like you to do it because I think we can use your voice without having to do a whole lot of processing to it. He said, do you know the character? And I said, no, I'm not familiar with it. He goes, so here's the trick. Etrigan is this giant demon who is terrifying. He also speaks like a Dr. Seuss character. And I was like, what? He goes, so you have to try and find a way to speak in a demon character voice in rhyme like the Cat in the Hat and still make it sort of vaguely scary. And I went, that's not easy. He's like, no, that's the trick.
Yeah, so, you had like a musical quality to your delivery, but at the same time, you have to be terrifying too.
Yeah, it's got to sound like a monster, and so that was fun. Just because as soon as he sort of told me what it was and introduced the character to me, I went, that is terrifying and sounds impossible. So cool. Let's see how badly I can screw it up.
And then other ones I just want to call out. Castlevania, you were in that.
Dragon,
and yep, that was, loved that series. I was one of those video game guys who was like, oh, they're making this into a cartoon, and it was like at that phase where they hadn't started redeeming themselves of doing the adaptations, and everybody in that project was fantastic. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, you were also Doomslayer in the recent Doom video game too, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in Doom Eternal, that was an interesting one because that was the first time that character ever spoke, and I didn't know what I was doing until like halfway through the session. Like I didn't know what the game was and what the character was. And then like halfway through the session in a break, a couple of the developers who were there had said, hey, can we do a quick photo? And I said, yeah, sure. Why? Like nobody usually cares. And they just said, well, this character hasn't spoken before. And I said, oh, well, I don't, who is it? And they said, it's the Doomslayer. I said, what do you mean he's not spoken this game? I remember this game when I was in school of the kids who had a lot of money, who had their own laptops playing the original Doom and like 16 grays on their Intel 486 laptop. And he goes, no, he's never spoken. This is the first time he's spoken. And I sort of paused and I went, I'm really glad you didn't tell me that at the beginning. I would have suddenly gone like, oh God, wait, no, what do I do? And they said, no, what you audition with is what we want. So just do that. And it actually kind of helped as a precursor to getting Magneto, because that was one as well where I came out of it and went, he doesn't talk much. It would be weird for him to go from never speaking to, Deadpool. But I came out of it and I went, I kind of have to decide what I will feel was a success. And I kind of came to the conclusion of thirds. So like, if a third of the people are like, no, that was good, and a third of the people go, I couldn't care one way or another, and a third of the people are like, that's awful, I hate it, either because he shouldn't talk or he's fine talking, but he shouldn't sound like you or whatever that is. I'm like, that I'm comfortable with. And it was kind of good preparation for getting Magneto and going, okay, there's a very, very real possibility that a lot of people will be very angry about what it is I'm doing. So how am I going to kind of prepare myself in case that eventuality comes to pass?
Well, before we get into the Magneto stuff, we do have one last question with regard to being in the world of voiceover and such. Any anecdotes, stories, etc., about just breaking into that world, or once you were in, like stuff that happened that you didn't know, like, you know, something, because we do end up getting, especially on these episodes with the voice cast,
right,
we do get people who are looking to forward their career within voiceover listening to these. So any stories you'd like to share from that side of the world?
So the couple of things I can say is, like, and this, I feel like this is something I hear from almost everybody, which is that the idea of, like, well, how do you get into it, or how do you break into it, is every single person has a different way that they actually sort of got in. So any story that you hear is not actually going to be that helpful to a different person for what their approach is going to be. The constant to it always, with everybody I've spoken to, is whether they fell into it, or whether it was something they always wanted to do, is the case. It is a factor of, like, it's gonna suck for a long time, and you got to know that going in. And part of it is also, like, unfortunately, there's a stroke of it. It's luck. Like, at a certain point, someone's got to decide to give you a break. Someone's got to just decide, well, really, I should go to one of these people, but I like this person, I'm going to give them a crack at it. And the thing about that is that everybody will get that opportunity, but when that comes, you have to be ready to actually do it, which means you have to be training, you have to know what you're doing, you have to spend all the time you can working on the bits that you can control. That's, the acting, that's understanding the world, whether it's video games or animation or promo or trailers or whatever it is. You need to understand that world. So if somebody suddenly says, hey, what we're thinking of is, something that sounds a little like, Troy Baker's character from here and Liam O'Brien's character from there, and you've got to kind of know those references. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, you can't be thinking that maybe I'll get my break and then I'll figure it out from there. It's possible that'll happen, but you want to know what you're doing going in. So the important part is learn as much as you can. D. Bradley Baker's I want to be a voice actor.com is the best site for anybody, because he has everything in there. And if somebody reads everything on that site, they'll be ahead of 99% of people trying to get in.
I think David Arrigo Jr. brought up that too, because
that same site. Yeah.
Yeah. He said his pitch was my website is I want to be a voice actor.com. And if you can't remember that, no, you don't.
That's good. And it's it's true. Like, it, like, D did that, and it is the biggest favor to everybody else who's working, because there's not an appearance or convention or something I go to that somebody doesn't come up with that question. And the two things I say is, go to this website and read everything on it. And then the other part of it is, like, don't be afraid to be weird. And that doesn't mean being weird for the sake of being weird, but if you see an audition or you see something and it says, and it's using, these references, and it says reference, Conan and Doomsday as character references, and you read it and you're like, I think it'd be a lot funnier if it was, sort of Woody Allen, then, but you're like, but it actually works, I know how to do that, then do that. Mm-hmm. It's weird. Don't do that just to be weird. But if you're like, now I have an idea, I think if I try and do this terrifying mercenary as Jimmy Stewart, it'll be funny and it'll work, because it'll be different, then do that. And the worst that can happen is someone listens to it and goes, that is not right, but that's a damn good Jimmy Stewart impression. And
yeah,
maybe
they can take that character elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So getting into Magneto, when the audition process starts for this character, do you know it's Magneto?
Yes. Partially because it was under a working title, and I can even tell you, I think it's on my desktop here. I can tell you what
it's been fun hearing, like, what all the code names for the characers were. I think JP said Morph was like Bob or something. It was like, what a hilarious.
they were all things like that. How do I get there we go. What was his name? What was the name they had for Magneto? So they were all, they were all working title names, but there was also a file on all of them that had video samples, as, like, this was the reference, and it was from the original show. So
that's pretty obvious.
Well, and now sometimes they will use a show and use everything from that show, a different show, because that material is out there and they're not stealing anything in it. And, like, tone, it's kind of correct. Mm-hmm. Harold was the working title name for,
that's hilarious,
for Magneto. But at the same time that we got those auditions, Jake was also on Justice League Action. And so Jake and my wife, Rachel Kinsey, knew each other and stayed in touch and were friendly. So Jake had messaged and was like, hey, you're going to get these auditions. I can't tell you a lot, but it's a thing that I'm on, and it is what you think it is, and put some time into it. And that was useful because a lot of the time, if you get something like this, you look at it and you're like, it's going to be celebrities. It's going to be famous names. That kind of gave an inkling of like, no, they're actually looking to cast the right actors regardless of Q rating or recognition. So I kind of knew what it was going in. I did not have the same background of familiarity with the show that a lot of people did because I was at boarding school in England when the show originally aired in the 90s. So I hadn't watched it back then. And I had to, actually, once I got the role, I had to go back and watch the original animated series as part of my homework, which is pretty fun homework. But yeah, I did not have the same familiarity with it. I knew of it and I knew, where it stood in sort of the pantheon of television, but that was the extent of it. I didn't know the storylines and know the characters as well as, especially even some of the other cast, and certainly most of production did.
So was your picture of Magneto like Ian McKellen then before?
Yeah, it was McKellen and Fassbender.
Gotcha.
And, and as soon as I watched the clips that they'd sent, it's funny. As soon as I watched the clips they sent, there was one that they'd sent from the original series where David Hemblum, who voiced him originally, had a line from Shakespeare, from The Tempest, which was, "O brave new world that has such people in it." And I know that play, and David, sort of similar to me, English, then moved to Canada and worked in Canada in theater and was a big theater guy. So I was like, oh, okay, our voices kind of sound similar and we have a similar background and sort of natural speaking dialect. He has a different cadence than me and used a different cadence in the show. But I went, oh, okay, so that theatricality part of it is familiar to me. And funnily enough, like that particular line is the line that's my hook. Like when I'm going to go and do a session, I listen to that clip and specifically that line because I'll mirror that line back, and then I kind of have the voice that I'm doing for it and go in from there.
Got it. Yeah, I was what I was going to follow up with is like, how is it approaching a character that you have so many iterations to compare to between McKellen, Fassbender, animated? There's 6 different versions of him that have been in cartoons before, right. And then you're coming in and taking over the role for the actor who had passed too.
Right.
So,
and that in a way that actually simplified it. It didn't make it simple, but it simplified it because my concern was solely with David's performance. They had said what we're looking for is a voice that if somebody is watching the animated series and going straight into 97 at the end of it, it doesn't have a record scratch moment of like, oh, that's completely different. But coming into 97, the character is in such a different space than he was in all of the animated series, which is why they're like, everything is different for him. The where he is, his outlook, how he's trying to relate to the world, how he dresses, how he sounds, the way he talks, all of it has been adjusted because he's had this massive shift in perception of the world. So it was a case of, they said it, which was very kind of them for me. They said, we want it to sound like David, but if it's a little different, or if it starts to move into a little bit closer to something that you do, that's fine over time because of this shift in the character. The aim was always to make it sound as close to David as possible. But it gave me a little bit of freedom as we went through the season to kind of put a little bit more, make some of my choices that were just my choices as opposed to trying to filter it through his performance and try and make sure it was consistent.
Yeah, because you had the version of Magneto that just like lost his lifelong friend, our frenemy, I guess, like.
Yeah, and so and saw him sacrifice everything for his idea of the way to get to where they both want to get to. Like, and that's always been one of the fascinating things about this particular character and this particular antagonistic relationship is for want of a better term, the bad guy has the same end goal as the good guy. They just have a different way of going about it. And so to see what the other person who he respects, one of the only other people who he respects and cares for as much as himself in the world has done what Charles does at the end of the animated series, that's enough to shift his perception and go, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Charles is right, and I owe it to him to actually take an honest crack at this. And one of the great things was, and I didn't watch the show, but I liked watching reaction videos on YouTube to the show. One of the great things was the number of times people were, especially in episode 2, when people were like, "Oh no, Magneto's going to kill them all now. It's over. Like, I didn't last." Like, he's like, as soon as Storm got hit, they're like, he's gonna wipe out everything. He lasted one episode of this good point of view, and it was really satisfying to see people being like, "Oh crap! Like, all right, he's just held it together." Mm-hmm. And stuck to it, and having people be able to go like, oh no, through the visuals and the writing and the way we did it, they're like, oh yeah, it wasn't a case of like, oh, he's just changed. It's like, no, you can tell. And he says like, I want to kill you, but I'm not going to right now.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've been doing with the hiatus between seasons is we are now in X-Men Evolution, and okay. It's wild because you can look at all these different versions of the character between the live action, between the other shows. The version that the animated series in '97 have is the closest to what I've been reading in comic books for literally decades.
Sure.
And Rod has a different experience because he's never been the picking up and reading the comic book guy.
Gotcha.
So it's for me, it's like, oh yeah, there is like, in Evolution, it's kind of like the mustache twirling, like Snidely Whiplash version of the character, which is fine and it works for that world. But I'm like, there's something that's always been so much more interesting about the version of Magneto that you're tapping into in the stories that you're being a part of telling on this one. So,
yeah, it's like I said, the fascinating part is that when your protagonist and antagonist want the same thing, mm-hmm. but they have a polar opposite idea of how to get there, that just makes for just such an interesting dynamic, because it's that weird thing of if either of them win, they both win. Mm-hmm. And you don't have that in most stories like this, especially like superhero things, action things, fantasy things, adventure things, where if either one of them actually wins, effectively they both win. It's just that if Eric wins, then mutants are safe, but a whole bunch of humans have died.
Yeah.
If Xavier wins, mutants are safe, but there's still a whole bunch of humans alive. But like, the people who they are ostensibly representing, Charles, as he says, it represents both, humans and mutants. But like, it's this weird thing of like, if you think about it and you're like, okay, if Magneto goes his normal route and actually succeeds, and, what ends up happening is humans might be servants, but they're going to be safe and protected once it's done, and mutants will be safe. And for Charles, it's like, well, it's done now. It's a dynamic that you don't see a lot.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes it fascinating, and it makes their closeness and their inability to ever write the other one off very realistic and very compelling.
Yeah. Speaking of reactions, you started alluding to it. We got to hear your version of Magneto speak for the first time in that stinger at the end of the trailer, mm-hmm. Holding the last will and testament of Charles Xavier. What was the reaction to that, like from your perspective? Obviously, we were losing our minds, but like, right. What was your vibe actually being on the other side of it?
Well, when it came to actually recording, so the way I got the job was I did the audition, and then they wanted a callback, which was effectively like a trial session, and we were recording episode 2. That was the one that they were like, we're going to record, and then we're going to take that and play with actors and make sure that it fits and all that kind of stuff. So that was the one that I'd read. So I'd read, an early version of episode 2 and recorded that for the audition. So then when we came back and we're actually started to record the show once, I got the job and we were into it. I got episode 1 and saw that final tag, already knowing like what happened in episode 2. Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple of moments, but that was the first one where it was a case of going, okay, so I have to ask to the writers and directors, how much is he twisting the knife here when he's sitting there looking at all of the X-Men just standing in the middle of the office, and especially like the obvious one is especially Scott, because as Scott quite rightly says, like, why am I not in charge? I've effectively been like, the command sergeant major of the team the whole time while Charles was the commanding officer. Why am I not in charge? And so, you know, to be able to just do it like that and read that to them, also dressed in like the black and purple trench coat with the Vidal Sassoon hair now out and all that kind of stuff. It was really fun to go like, how is this just straight delivering, or does he know what he's doing to them? And they sort of said, no. He knows what he's doing to them. So, you know, and because the character was genuinely going to try to do the right thing, it allowed me to be a little more melodramatic with like twisting the knife and being a little more snarky with it. Whereas if it was all a show, then he would have been trying to be very honest to make it seem like, look, this is how it happened, but this is what we're going to do, as opposed to like knowing that he's actually going to try and do the right thing. He can be a little bit snippy with it, which was so much fun.
Yeah, and I remember, especially those first 2 episodes, there were all the theories going around of like, was this legitimately Charles's will, or is this fake? Right. And he set this all up. And, you know, even going into episode 2, where there's like the Storm moment, it's like, oh, did he willingly sacrifice Storm? Like, because of the character's past, like, and your delivery was that perfect combination of, I don't know if he's in on it or he's so serious about it and reacting like as a real person would. It was really hard to tell which side, and I think that's what made the story, you know, better than the, you know, like I said, it's not a Snidely Whiplash scenario,
right? So. And the fun thing was like that even carried through like episode 5. I remember seeing some of the reaction stuff of that, people saying like, oh, Magneto orchestrated this, like this is clearly like Eric, like going like, oh, like the ending is clearly a fake ending, because it's obvious like this is what he's been doing for the first half of the season. He's been organizing this to justify, you know, all the to justify the turn, all that kind of stuff. And that was really fun to watch, because that meant, oh, okay, it worked. Like this brilliant concept that the production had and how they were going to approach it had worked, and that was really, really fun to see.
Where were you when that episode aired? You were not in Los Angeles, right?
No, I was actually. So
you were. Did you do the watch party thing that it was like a group of just the cast and crew were watching together?
Yeah, I came down for that. I live I live about an hour north of LA. Actually, funnily enough, I live 5 minutes away from Ray Chase, which we didn't find out until the premiere. When somebody in like a group chat was like, "Hey Matthew, are you driving down from wherever?" And I said, "Yeah." And Ray goes, "Wait, where do you live?" I said, he's like, "We're like 3 miles away from each other." And we've been recording for 2.5 years, and nobody had mentioned that in production. They hadn't been like, "Oh yeah, well you and Ray are near each other." So, but both of us actually had driven down to do that watch party one, just because we were like, all right, this is one that'll be interesting to see with a group.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine being in a bar in Hollywood watching that. That's where we were.
I didn't want to do that.
No, nobody should have.
No, we watched ours the night before at midnight, and then we would go to the events at Scum and Villainy, and that one, it was very much when we know everything is hitting, we're watching the crowd. Like, we weren't even watching the screens at that point. It was wild.
Yeah.
Because that happened to be,
there was a part of me that would have been interested to see that.
There happened to be a screening, too, where I still don't know how they pull this off, but, like, every once in a while there are children at this bar. And so there were, like, literal children, like, under, like, 11, 12 years old that were just hanging out there. We're like, of all the episodes, you brought it to this one.
And there was definitely a dude in the bar who was dropping F-bombs very casually as certain scenes were happening. And I'm just looking at him like, oh, that kid's learning new stuff today.
Yeah, it's like, so you get to learn about all the curse words and genocide in the same night. Good luck, parents, you know?
Yeah. I mean, what's the kind of marching that those shadow guys are doing? We're not going to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have the bandwidth to explain the Third Reich to you.
So I'm actually going to skip ahead because we're on this like path around like episode 5 and stuff. You just had some amazing, iconic speeches. Like, is there one that stands out as like, God, I nailed this as you were doing it?
No, honestly, nothing as I was doing it.
Okay.
Because I was taking it over from David, and because we record solo, unlike the original show, which they recorded, in Canada in the 90s, where they would record in a room. We all record solo. I like, full disclosure, I spent the first few months of recording kind of going, I don't know if this is working. I don't like, it feels very theatrical. It feels very big, and I don't know if this is going to work. And then there got to a point where I went, I can't change it now. I can't change what I'm doing for the characterization now. I have to assume that if it was wrong, that Meredith and Jake and Bo and everybody else would have said like, no, you're off. So I'm like, whatever I'm doing, they seem to be happy with. And so it was a weird thing of like, the writing was so good that there were certain times when I looked at it and I just went, I have to get out of the way of the writing. I have to just sort of say the words and sort of stay in character, and the words are going to do a lot of the work. There are lines that were just really fun to say, especially some of the speeches were amazing. Obviously the UN speech was so well written, and they brought me back in probably 4 or 5 times to tweak that, because they would cut stuff, they would move stuff, they would adjust it, and sometimes it would be just changing 1 or 2 words in it, but each time it like made it a little more succinct and made it land a little bit better. But a couple of the just like the one-liner comebacks were really fun, just because they're so. He doesn't get caught by anybody else. He a couple of times he catches Scott once or twice. He catches Morph once or twice. He catches Val once or twice, and some of those ones, whether it's but so many nations allow their leaders to be terrorists, or whether it's the line when Morph says like somebody didn't get a pony for his Sweet 16, and he said my parents were killed. Kind of thing. It's just like
That was something that was so amazing about Magneto in this continuation of the series, was like he ended up saying all the things that were implicit in the 90s explicitly now, especially that speech, but also just his parents and all that stuff, like, because in the 92 series it was like, oh, there was a conflict in Bosnia and it was all plus signs for the people that, and like okay.
It was one of the fun things of being able to because it's now streaming, and because it is designed to be able to be watched by kids, but it is sort of aimed at the people who were watching it when they were kids. Being able to be very clear about what we're talking about was really nice, and it was one of the things I think that made this season land so well, was that X-Men, and I didn't know this coming in because of the good fortune of who I happened to be born as, but like X-Men seems to land with a lot of people in a way that a lot of other superhero or fantasy stuff doesn't necessarily, because it is such a good avatar for any sort of disenfranchised or group that is prejudiced against. Like, there's so many different characters in X-Men, represent so many different variations, that everybody who comes from a background where they were, up against it just by virtue of how they were born, sees something in it which they feel represents themselves. And so once you're no longer having to abide by the rules of, Saturday morning kids television, you can do things which very much more are clear about where the show stands and about what the effects of anybody who's trying to disenfranchise or punish a group of people merely for who they are, what the costs of that could be.
Totally.
Yeah, I think like that really does come through Magneto this time around, but even implicitly in the original series, because I grew up in an immigrant family, like we're a Korean family in the middle of Indiana, the only one, and so like I don't know about
the entirety of Indiana.
Yeah, right. But I don't know about everybody else, but like I know me and my brother, like we all knew we were supposed to like Xavier and we respected him, but we all silently agreed with Magneto, because Charles is the guy that is well-intentioned but grew up with privilege. He's wealthy. The Magneto like lost his family in the Holocaust and survived it. Like it's like a different scale of things, and so like whenever Xavier's like, no, world peace is attainable, Magneto's like, let me tell you about how that goes historically.
It's the thing of Batman and Iron Man are awesome, but none of us are billionaires or geniuses. And Superman is really cool, but most of us aren't invulnerable. And like so many of the major, superheroes, there's something about them which makes them a little bit other. Like they are representative, and some people, people attach to them or love them because something about them they feel reflects them. But one of the things that's amazing about the X-Men world is that we focus on the X-Men, which are the mutants that have powers that give them, superhuman abilities. But there are a ton of mutants who are just people who have things that are different. And, somebody like the Morlocks or Leech is a good representative. Like, you have these characters who may just look different, so they can't pass as human. But what they have doesn't give them an advantage in everyday life. It just makes it easy for people to pick them out. And that's one of the really, really fun things about X-Men, is that it gives you the ability to represent and deal with that, because not all mutations make people superheroes. Some of them just make them different.
And I think that's what gave X-Men 97 a double whammy. Obviously there's the fan base of us that came from the 90s that were already coming to the table, but then there's entire generations now that have only known the Avengers as far as Marvel. And so now they're learning the Avengers were the cops. The X-Men are the real ones. They went through it,
Yeah.
So I see behind you, obviously there's the Magneto helmet and some Funko Pops.
Yes.
It won't, I think Rod crops the video, but I got my Magneto helmet up there as well. So
we'll pan over. I'll try to remember it.
Yeah, you do a pan over in the edit. Awesome.
My office is a mess at the moment because we've used it to kind of throw stuff in. But there's everything along the top of that couch there is all sort of Magneto stuff. There's toys there. There's one of the posters there. There's a art piece that my wife had an artist commission that's me in the helmet, which is
nice,
awesome.
Nice.
There's the thing that's in front of it that you can't really see it is one of Larry Houston's drawings that he there's all sorts of stuff, and there's posters, and then there's just also a bunch of junk that is blocking the way. But I've got the 8-bit X-Men, the 8-bit Magneto here. These are some of my wife's characters, and we have a lot of stuff around it. It's one of those things where there's so much for X-Men that as soon as it came out, I was like, oh, let's get all this stuff. And then we're like, oh my God, there's a lot of stuff.
Let's get some of the stuff.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, especially I've seen this, going to Comic-Con and smaller events and stuff like that. What are some cool interactions you've had with the fans? And, has there been a cool gift that you've been given by a fan at an autograph signing, anything like that you want to share with us?
Yeah. One of the things that has been awesome, and it links to what I was talking to a minute ago, is, there's always a lot of people who are coming up because they just love the IP. They love the characters, they love the show, they love the world, etc. And this has happened at every single show. There have been people who have come up because they, for whatever their background is, they have found themselves sort of excluded from family, from friends, from etc. for who they are. And so many of them have come up and said, my family and I don't talk because of who I am. And this show was something that, my dad, my mom, my uncle, my grandfather, whoever had always watched as a kid. And so we started, and, so I put it on, or they put it on, and we would watch it together. And one of the things that's great, similar to sort of the way that Star Trek was set up, because this is humans versus mutants, you're able to address issues without people feeling like they're being lectured to or targeted. People don't feel like personally like they're being accused of things. And so people have come up and said, I haven't been able to have an honest conversation with my members of my family for years, but we would watch episodes of the show, and we had this thing that we were both involved in and invested in, which, helped to bring us together. And then there would start to be times when somebody would say oh, I guess that's kind of what you felt like, huh? And they'd be like, yeah. That's what I felt like. That's what this feels like. And that's been something that, I did not see coming. I did not foresee the frequency with which people come up with that. And that's been really, really cool. And people have come up with everything from, there'll be people at the shows who are artists who are selling things, who bring cool stuff like this.
Oh wow!
Which is it's 3D. It comes out. It's awesome. And it's all wood carving, and bits.
That's awesome.
The helmet comes off, kind of thing.
Oh.
And they're sort of over there on my desk. But there's people will come up. Kids and things will come up with stuff that they've drawn or things that they've made of necklaces or shirts or stuff like that. And people have brought some incredibly creative, really cool things. All of them are better than what I can do artistically. So every single time somebody brings something up, a lot of the time people will come up and say, it's not great, I'm sorry. And I look at it and I go, I couldn't do that if you gave me a YouTube tutorial in 40 hours.
Awesome. Well, one question, the elephant in the room that we have to address. Were you expecting Magneto to be a thing?
The two things that when they showed up, I sort of said, like, this is gonna get a reaction, and everybody went, yeah, that's the hope, were the costume and the Rogue relationship. That was one where, like, my familiarity with X-Men was primarily through the movies, but even there, even though Gambit wasn't in them, like, I knew exactly who Gambit was, and I knew what that relationship was, and I knew that was the romantic couple in the show. Like, Jean and Scott are like the parents, but the star-crossed lovers have always been Rogue and Gambit. And so when that came up, and I went, oh, that's gonna be a thing that is a little bit hard for people to stomach. They said, yeah, but it is canon. It's been in the comics already. And when I actually thought about it, there's a thing to it that makes a lot of sense, which is that those two characters, more than almost any other, some others could, but those two are alone. Eric lost every member of his family when he was 12 or 13 years old. And so there's a line, and originally it was his line, and then in the rewrites and things it shifted. And I think actually Charles says it now in their back and forth in Eric's head in the last couple of episodes. But originally the iteration of the line was Eric was talking about going to a Passover dinner, I think, with a girlfriend when he was young, and looking around and realizing that he was at a table with her family, and there were 8 people who all kind of looked like each other. And he realized that there's nobody on the planet that looks like him. Mm-hmm. Like, everyone else is gone. And it was a case of, like, realizing, like, no matter what, there is nobody on this earth that I can look at and see any of myself in. And Rogue, for the obvious reasons, also is incredibly alone. So having those two characters who, to a certain extent, others have it, as well, but to a certain extent are the most alone, who also, it turns out, happen to be able to connect in a way that they can't with almost anybody else, it makes a lot of sense. Like, it makes sense why they would be drawn to each other. And so, like, once that was sort of made clear, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I get it. I also get why, she makes the choices that she makes. Like, that's not the right relationship for either of them, long term. But it doesn't mean that there's not something there that is absolutely, real and absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. And then it became like a little bit of a meme war at one point too. It literally there is an Instagram account that we found out about called Magneto, and and I don't know what the starting point for it was that you would have seen it probably before I would have, but I just remember after WonderCon there was that great shot where it was you and Lenore and AJ coincidentally being in the background. And that felt like that kicked off the internet embracing what was going on. It was also the perfect timing of it. So
well, that was one where after we'd done a panel at WonderCon, we were at a restaurant having dinner, and there were so many people in that group that we were scattered among a couple of tables. And so, and I don't remember who it was, but the person taking the photo was like, oh, let me get a photo of you and Lenore. And I realized that AJ was at the table behind us, in the booth behind us, with one other person. And so we were like to the other person, like, get out of there for a second. And AJ's like, what are you doing? I said, we're doing this. And he's like, all right, fine. No, AJ is one of my best friends. I've known him for, we met in person when we were both doing previs for God of War Ragnarok. Ragnarok? Yeah. And we were I was doing Kratos and he was doing Atreus, yeah. So we were interacting with each other all day for years doing that. And like I said, he was in Crudes with me. So like AJ and I are apparently now we can only be hired when the other one is hired. It's fine by me because he's a better actor than me. So like I was able to be like, hey, we're going to do this thing. And it just happened that like the thing lined up and we could make a little adjustment to do that. And it was a thing of like this will be fun. This is kind of funny. And then and of course as soon as it was posted, certain people immediately were like, "What?" Very, very upset.
Well, even how you three were seated at that panel at WonderCon, because I was there, it was you each on one side of Lenore too. So like all of that lined up perfect for the narrative.
Which my memory was a cock up. Like it was like Lenore was supposed to be the last person mentioned to sort of be on the end, and Charlie and Chris, I don't remember which one, just got the order round like at the end, because after sort of introducing 6 or 8 people. And so it flipped around. So that was a happy accident that, it's sort of, we were like, oh, okay, this is... The only thing for me is that I then had to answer questions after Lenore, and Lenore has been speaking publicly and like off the cuff for so long and is so good at it that having to follow her when she gives answers to things is an exercise in futility and humiliation. As I learned at that was the first panel we done. And so she gave like the first answer to whatever the first one was. And I just went, well, I'm screwed. So I have to follow that.
Is there a favorite single moment for you from the first season?
Yeah, I love the moment, and I don't remember which episode it is like 9, I think. The moment when Jean and Scott say goodbye to Cable.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That moment is so well done, and it's the exchanges between them, the way that it's handled, the way that it's played, the way that all 3 of them play that, and the way that was sort of staged and written is that. There's individual like one moments here and there, but that was the one that when I saw that, and part of it was, I had not seen that until the show came out. And I saw it, like I hadn't seen any of it along the way. I'd read some of it in a script, but that was it, and it always changes, and I don't get any changes that aren't my scenes for a script after I've the script necessarily. So that one was kind of fresh to me, but that moment in it I just thought was really, really good. I thought that one was
awesome,
terrific.
Asking this question under the context of I am not asking you to tell us anything that you know for season 2, you've recorded for season 2. We're not trying to get this information out of you. The question is there an X-Men story that you've heard about, or just something you would like to see from Eric in the coming seasons?
That's let me think how. I mean,
and if you want us to cut that question, that's totally fine too.
No. You can leave it. I'm trying to think. So okay. the difficulty that I have in some of that stuff is that I am not as well versed in all of the comics. And the one thing with the show is that everything is getting pulled from the comics. Like there's no, at least so far as I know, there's no like, oh, we're just going to create a new storyline. It's all being pulled from stuff that's already there. Mm-hmm. But I kind of feel like we've immediately started hitting like a lot of the greatest hits. Yeah. And we've got so much stuff so much stuff that has been sort of woven together to hit as many things as possible. What I will say is, of the stuff that we've done in season 1, of the stuff that I know, of the limited amount of canon that I know, the stuff that I know exists, I am very happy with the choices that are currently being made for what is being used.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Nice. It's a very well-crafted response.
Yeah. It's tough. And the other problem, of course, is that we finished the initial record for season 2 like a year ago, because then there's you got to do all the animation. So we're starting to get back into like pickups now, but man, I'm old and I have small children, so I don't sleep much, so I don't remember.
Yeah.
So, I get to pick up some pickups, and I'm going, did we do this? Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Like that's the one thing. Like animation takes so long that there's times that there's some episodes I saw and I went, oh, I totally forgot that happened. That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's another interesting thing to bring up to the listeners that may not know, because I see this on like dumb forum posts sometimes. People they think that animation works like season 1 came out, and so the next day you guys just like walk into a theater and then like the animation appears on screen, and so you created the entire second season in response to like season 1 or whatever. It's like, no, like a lot of this was in the works like way before anybody saw anything.
And it's slow. Like it's funny, you will see things that say like it takes 10 months or a year to make an episode of The Simpsons, and you go, well, then how do they make 22 episodes a season every year? And you go like, well, because they're making them all at the same time.
Yep.
Like that's the crazy thing that is different about animation than live action. Like live action, there's overlapping between episodes, even if you're making like CSI or something, there's an overlap. But generally, you're shooting an episode every week or 10 days, and then you're into post on that, and you're on to the next one. In animation, like, you may kind of record and work from beginning to end, but you're effectively working on every episode at the same time all the way through. So it'll take a year or 16 months to make an episode. It's just production is working on 10 episodes at the same time.
Yeah. And of course, we saw it especially with 97. They're not doing the classic shortcuts that especially cartoons from the 1980s would do, where they're just reusing assets and things like that, or somebody stands perfectly still and only the mouth is moving. Like the level of animation for this show was beyond what I was even expecting, even compared to What If. Like, I thought the What If animation was beautiful, but this had that right balance of modern animation, but not just being like the CG inspired animation and such. Right. So
I've been really lucky in the animated stuff I've done for the most part. Like I said, with the first thing I did with Troll Hunters, that looked like feature because Guillermo said, well, this is how it has to look. And DreamWorks said, well, that's not what we do for television. We don't have the processing time. And he went, yeah, you do. And they went, okay, yes, we do. We'll just do that. So and then most of the stuff I've got to do is that the animation has just been beautiful. Like, you mentioned Castlevania. Castlevania is beautiful. Dota, the animation is beautiful. Even the Crude show is this bright, vibrant sort of cartoonish thing. But you look at that and you look at the feature film and you're like, yeah, you didn't have the same time or money, but what you were able to do for the TV show is amazing. And that follows through into here. Like you said, like What If had this. I personally really like the stylized look of that animation. I thought that was really, really cool. But again, like, to be able to make that choice and be like, this is how we're going to do it. This is the choice we're going to make. And then we're really lucky in that they were saying, like, we want it to not suddenly feel like we've gone from 2D to 3D. But obviously, in order to actually make this, we have to do it in a computer. But we're going to do it computer in using like the 2D as a model for it. And it makes this really, really cool result that you don't always get to see.
So, Rod, I have my final two questions lined up. Is there anything else you'd like to ask Matthew before we start wrapping up?
Just a real short thing that I know a lot of the internet's going to love. Did you have any inkling on how horny Magneto is going to be characterized? Like, because it's one thing to hear the dialogue, but then you see the visuals. So there's a bunch of friends. Like, one of my friends, she has like a smutty romance novel podcast.
Yeah.
And she was like, I might watch X-Men at some point. It's like, Shawnee, let me show you a picture of Magneto in the last half of the season, when he's tied up against the egg.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, okay. And then she binged it all in 2 nights after that.
Yeah, I didn't know it was going to be quite the way it came out. Like I said, we recorded the majority of it. We record the main body of it, and then it's like a year before you actually see anything. Mm-hmm. And I think the first time I saw a still even of what he looked like was at, I think it was SDCC when they released a couple of character pictures of it. That was the first time I as well had seen what the characters were going to look like. And so once we started watching through the show and going okay, for a start, my wife and people are like, oh, well, you need to cosplay as Magneto. I'm like, I can't afford the steroids to look like that.
Yeah.
65-year-old man. I can't do it.
Or have your flesh melting into rose.
If I was, if I had 6% body fat at 65 and could bench press a truck, I would wear skin tight clothes, if any, as well. But yeah, then the funny thing is that my understanding is that it was even more so, and Marvel were like, we're gonna have to tone this down. It's a little too much.
Yeah,
these characters are it's supposed to be sort of, they're supposed to be a cross of superhero action stuff with Melrose Place, but this might be a little more Red Shoes Diary than Melrose Place. We gotta roll this back a little.
All right, well, we found the promo clip for socials right there. So we asked all our guests to do this in whatever context they feel is appropriate. Okay. In the voice of Magneto, would you give us a Cyclops is waiting for me?
Absolutely. Cyclops is waiting for me.
I knew there was going to be something after. That's why I stayed like quiet and I laid out. I knew there was going to be like something after. That's amazing.
I gotta say, like, I Cyclops he's a character like Superman or Captain America, where it's so easy for him to be uninteresting because he's so earnest and straightforward. And what, the writers and Ray did with Cyclops is mind blowing to me, because they kept him exactly who the character is. Didn't try and, make him gritty or make him this or make it that, but like keeping who the character is made him so bloody interesting. And a lot of the exchanges between Eric and Scott, I just love. Like, whether it's, Poison, Black Roaster, things like that. Like, some of those exchanges are just so good.
Yeah, that was actually one of our comments going into the first episode is, holy crap, they made him cool again.
Yeah.
Because I was the kid who bought, X-Men #1 with the 5 different covers in the 90s and stuff like that. And I like Scott, but our podcast is literally cracking jokes at Scott as a concept, because I don't know if you remember the scene. We could not come up with a name for the show. We went through like 20 names, and then we said this one that happens where it's like, Wolverine is lusting over Jean and she kind of like leaves him hanging.
Right.
And we both laughed and we're like, that's good enough. Yeah. And he was like, oh yeah. Rod for Christmas one year bought me a mug that says Cyclops tears on it. Like that's how we treat Scott. And we're like, oh, he's cool again. Thank you.
Yeah. And he's so cool. Like like that's one of the ones. What they did, what Ray and the writers and Meredith and everything did with Scott is just that's one of the ones that I'm just like, and that's one of the reasons also why I like that scene I mentioned of when they say goodbye to Cable so much, because they had built Scott and Jean and Cable up in a way that made that scene really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, final question. If somebody's being introduced to X-Men 97 and they have somehow never seen any other piece of X-Men media, and it is your portrayal of Magneto that they get the character for the first time.
Okay.
No baggage, no preconceived notions. What do you want them to take away from Eric?
Oh. That's a really interesting question.
I hit every single person from the show with this one. I'm very proud of coming up with that one.
Yeah.
Good.
I think the most important thing to take away from Eric is that no matter what, at the end of the day, this iteration of him especially, and this is going to sound weird at first, is he is almost entirely selfless. Because he doesn't need to do any of this shit. Like, he could just live and nobody would know what he is if he wanted to, but everything that he does is because there are people who are at risk and who are not able to protect themselves. And that happened once and he couldn't do anything. Now he happens to be one of, I don't know, a dozen people on the planet who can single-handedly shut down the planet. And so he's like, I don't have a choice. I have to try and protect people. And his, like, even to the X-Men who he has been the antagonist of for so long, like, when something happens to them, he's like, I don't care that you guys have fought me and stymied me at every step. Like, you're my people and I will stand with you, no matter what, when push comes to shove. And that sort of commitment to a cause greater than himself is one of the things that I think makes him so interesting as not just an antagonist, but as a character.
Awesome. Love that. I don't know what we could follow up with after that one. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us,
just
man.
Watch that and don't watch Ian McKellen or Michael Fassbender, because then I start to get very self-conscious. That's what they're like, oh, you're taking over from David Hemblum. Oh, God. Also, the other two versions that everybody knows are Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender. Great. That's not stressful at all.
Yeah. It's not like you're taking over after like a Batman Forever version of the character.
Yeah, it's not like there's been like a bad. They made the big movies and then they kept making them and eventually it kind of got bad and they kind of went B movie and you're like, oh, okay, it's vaguely competent now. You're like, no. The only people who've played this, and even if you go to like the other animated iterations, like you say, it's people like Chris Judge or someone. And you're like, okay, cool. There's not a weak link. There's different versions, but there's not a weak link. So,
yeah. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time today. What should people know about what you have coming up, aside from, the anticipation we all have for season 2 of X-Men 97?
I am crap at social media, but the one thing I am good at is actually putting appearances and things like that in shows that are coming out on it. So, and the only one I'm actually good at being on or putting stuff on is Instagram. So, MJ Waterson at Instagram has most of it. I think the next thing after this comes out is I'm going to be at Justice Comics in Tempe, Arizona on November the 9th for a signing day and stuff there. So if you happen to be in the Arizona area, that's a very cool store. It's like 2 stores next to each other, and one is all like old comics and one is all new stuff.
Oh, nice.
So you
awesome.
can't get anything there, so that's really cool. So I'll be down there in November. I think that's the next thing, and then I think that's kind of it until the new year. And then next year, as far as appearances, I'll be at 1 or 2 things a month, but I don't remember them off the top of my head because,
Of course,
I'm old and I have small children and I don't sleep. So I remember almost.
Understandable. Well, again, thank you. For the audience, if you have any thoughts, make sure you drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload or the official Instagram post about this episode. If you like what you heard, we would appreciate a podcast app rating. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, CastBox. I don't think there's any other way to finish the episode other than saying Magneto was right.
Yes. And also leave a comment if you want to petition Matthew to do a 6-pack cosplay of Magneto next time.
Also, they'll have to be like, we'll have to set up like a GoFundMe or something, because I'm not kidding. That's like Liver King amount of steroids to get to that. It's 10 grand a month in PEDs. And as I just said, have children. I can't afford that. Yeah. But if anybody wants to contribute that much money to go to steroids, I'm sure my wife will be thrilled.
There you go.
There we go.
My doctor probably no. My doctor would be like, "How did you go from 45 to 75 in 6 months?"
Yeah,
but I looked good.